If you're watching this video, it's likely that you've been studying Spanish for over 3 months and you're making steady progress, you feel like you were progressing in the language and you felt like you reached an intermediate level, and suddenly all your progress stopped and you hit what we call the intermediate plateau, where all your progress just seemed to flatline, and now you're debating whether you should continue with the language and break that plateau or whether you should give up. And in this video, I'm going to give you 5 things that you might be doing that is probably keeping you at that intermediate plateau and stopping you from reaching advanced and fluent levels in Spanish. And the number one way that you are keeping yourself at the intermediate plateau is by not learning the subjunctive. And the reason why people don't learn the subjunctive is because they feel it's really overwhelming. There's so much information online about it, there's so many different ways to learn it, and it just seems really, really complex. And if you're unfamiliar as to what the subjunctive is, it's basically a mood in Spanish that is used for uncertainty, doubts and denial, commands, hypothetical situations, time expressions, and much, much more, unfortunately. And that is why loads of people put it off, and that is why you are probably still at that intermediate plateau. But I bet right now, if you started learning the subjunctive and reached a good understanding of it, you'd go straight from intermediate to advanced right away, because that is how important the subjunctive is to Spanish speaking, because you're going to use it every single day. And if you've been doing a lot of listening to Spanish, you'll find that the subjunctive is used in nearly every conversation, so you need to get used to using it, and unfortunately you need to stop putting it off. I understand that it's probably the hardest thing to learn in Spanish, and I know for me it definitely was, but it's something you've got to start now, because if you don't start now, you might never start and you might just keep holding yourself at that intermediate plateau. But luckily for you, I've created a subjunctive course that is coming out in the next 2 weeks, breaking down all the information that is within the subjunctive. So whether that be conjugations, triggers, exceptions and weird rules that you just got to learn. And all of this is coming out within the next 2 weeks in my community, but I'd recommend joining before the course is released, because once it is released, the price is going to go up. So make sure that you join now rather than later. And the second way that I bet you are holding yourself back from reaching that advanced level in Spanish is not having a plan. I find with a lot of people at the intermediate level that I've coached online is they don't have a plan. They don't know what their goals are for the next month, 2 months, 3 months. And it's very hard to make progress in a language without a plan and a roadmap to know where you are going and how you are going to get there. And this lack of direction leads to a lot of time wasted, because when you sit down to study, you don't know what to study. You're thinking about, should I study vocab? Should I study grammar? Should I do some speaking? Should I practice my comprehension? And all of these things you've got to debate every single time you sit down to study. And this leads to procrastination, and this leads to less time actually studying and more time wasted. And if you want to solve this problem, I can give you a solution right now. Just sit down for 5 minutes and just think, where do I want to be in Spanish in 3 months? What is a realistic target that I can have? And then spend 5 minutes thinking about it, really think what is realistic with the time you have available and where your level is right now in Spanish. So for example, some realistic goals in 3 months for an intermediate learner could be, I want to have a good level of understanding with the subjunctive. I want to increase my comprehension from 40% when I listen to podcasts to 70, 80%. And number 3, I want to have much more confidence in speaking and make less mistakes when I am speaking. And those are 3 realistic goals that you could set for 3 months down the line. And then all you've got to do is ask yourself, well, how am I going to get to these goals? The number one thing is you're probably going to need to sit down and study the subjunctive once or twice a week for up to an hour, 2 hours maybe. And number 2, you're going to need to increase the amount of time you spend listening to Spanish to improve your comprehension. Otherwise, how are you going to improve your comprehension without listening to Spanish speakers? And number 3, you're going to need to sit down and start speaking more and start really analysing the mistakes that you're making. Maybe you need to listen back to recordings of you speaking and correct your mistakes, and then go back and try again. And those are the 3 things that are going to help you reach that 3-month goal. And then just work those into your week-to-week plans of study in Spanish. And that is how you're going to break this intermediate barrier. And the third way that I find people hold themselves back at the intermediate level is not speaking enough. I've literally just created a course for intermediate to advanced learners of Spanish. And the main part of the course is getting you to speak more, getting you to speak for 5 minutes every single day. And the reason I do this is because I find that a lot of people, when they get to the intermediate level, don't have much confidence speaking. And that is because they put off speaking in the beginner levels of learning Spanish, which I understand is fair enough, because it is quite difficult and awkward speaking a language at the beginner levels. However, when you get to an intermediate level of Spanish, you are starting to really develop your skills, and you are more than capable of speaking in Spanish for 5 minutes, whether that be basic conversations and basic sentences about what you've done today, how you were feeling, what you're wearing. All of these basic things you can cover in a 5-minute conversation once a day. And what this is going to do is really, really skyrocket your progress in Spanish, because the aim of you learning Spanish is to be able to speak it, no? And you can't do that if you can't speak the language. And the way that you're going to speak the language is by practicing and understanding the mistakes that you make when you speak and how you can overcome them. And what I find is the reason why people don't speak at the intermediate level is they're afraid of making mistakes. And I should really put this as a separate point, but I'm going to include it into the speaking, because I find that the reason people don't speak is because they're afraid of making mistakes. However, how do you learn a language? You make mistakes and you learn from them. So you need to make the mistakes so you can learn and you can break this intermediate plateau. If you're not making mistakes and you are avoiding them, how do you expect to reach advanced levels and fluent levels of Spanish? You need to really put yourself out of your comfort zone and make those mistakes and then learn from them. And that is how you will break this intermediate plateau that you are sitting at right now. And the main takeaways from this point are, number 1, stop thinking that making mistakes is a bad thing. It is one of the best things that you will do in your Spanish learning. The more mistakes you make, the faster you learn. And number two, increase the amount of speaking you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And that is what's going to help you reach that goal of fluency. And the fourth way that I find people get stuck at that intermediate barrier is not having a clear reason why they are learning Spanish. Because what happens when you are learning a language for long periods of time is there's going to be days, and I bet you've already experienced it, but there's going to be days where you sit down and you have no motivation, you don't want to study, you feel like you're not making any progress and you're getting really bored, and all you want to do is spend time on your phone or do anything else but learn Spanish. And this is exactly why you need to have a clear reason as to why you are learning Spanish. Because in these moments, how are you going to discipline yourself and motivate yourself to keep studying Spanish? And the examples of why you might want to learn Spanish is it unlocks literally a whole continent for you. If you want to travel to South America and places like Colombia and Peru, which I did this summer, speaking Spanish makes the trip 10 times better, easily. Because not only can you interact with locals in a much better way, you also just get a better understanding of the culture and just the environment that you were in. And it's so much more fun, trust me, being able to interact with the locals and have conversations with them and really connect with the people. And this is not only South America as well, you have so many incredible places in Central America and Spain as well to explore. And being able to speak Spanish unlocks basically a whole new world to you and a whole new massive population of people that you can speak to and learn from and learn about their culture and their food and their dancing, whatever it may be for you, whatever you're interested in. And other reasons might be work related. You might want to have that on your CV that you're fluent in another language and how much that could help you gain more promotions or just look better on your CV. And another thing maybe you just want to have a really cool skill to impress your friends with and just have something that if you ever need it, it's there to use. So you really want to have these clear in your mind because unfortunately, the intermediate plateau isn't the last plateau that you were going to hit in this journey of learning Spanish. There's going to be plenty more plateaus and plenty more moments where you don't feel motivated, but having a clear why and a clear reason as to why you want to learn Spanish is going to help you so much in the long run. Be consistent and disciplined towards reaching your goal of fluency in Spanish. And the fifth and final way that I find people get stuck at the intermediate plateau is simply just not listening to enough Spanish. And I mean, I just can't stress this enough. I mean, one of the main ways that I improved my understanding of the subjunctive, my ability to speak Spanish, my ability to understand grammar and use vocab was all from listening to Spanish speakers, have conversations. Say for example, you listen to Spanish an hour a day. What happens is you're not going to improve in that first hour. So over time, those hours stack. And when those hours stack, your improvement in Spanish goes sort of like an exponential curve. You go from sort of little bits of improvement, but then the more and more you do consistently with listening, it just goes higher and higher and higher until you're absolutely fine in Spanish. Because what happens is it's all those hours of listening just stack on each other. All the understanding, all the different verb conjugations they're using, all the different grammar, subjunctive triggers, they all just get more and more solidified into your mind the more you hear them used. And the more you hear them used, the more likely you are going to use them correctly yourself. And that is why I just can't stop banging on about listening to as much Spanish as possible. And I really wish people would do this more. And that's what I tell my clients all the time and people within my Spanish community. Listen to more Spanish, because this is really what's going to help you elevate your progress in Spanish and break this intermediate plateau. And what I'd recommend you do now is spend an extra 30 minutes every day for the next 2 weeks listening to Spanish. An extra 30 minutes on top of what you already do, and see how much your Spanish improves in the next 2 weeks, and see if you are still stuck at that intermediate plateau at the end of the next 2 weeks. And yeah, that is the end of the video. Hopefully this has helped you recognize some of the ways that you might be keeping yourself at that intermediate plateau and holding yourself back from really making serious progress in Spanish. And if you have enjoyed this video, please drop a like and drop a comment as to maybe other tips that you've learned along your journey of Spanish to help other people. And also, if you are interested in joining a community of like-minded Spanish learners and intermediate and advanced level of Spanish, check out the link in the description. And remember, I've got a subjunctive course coming in the next 2 weeks, so join before that because the price will rise once that is released. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Hasta la próxima. Adios.